Hi there, I'm Melanie Donis, veterinarian at Companion Care Veterinary Hospital, Mechanicsville, Maryland, and I am here tonight to bust 10 of the dog food myths. Start off, thank you everybody for joining in. Appreciate you watching us here, coming from BFF Studio in Brandywine, Maryland. And I'm here to talk to you all about the top 10 dog food myths, and we're going to bust them. They are things that I hear every single day in my practice in Mechanicsville, Maryland from dog owners. And I just wanted to bring them to you and let you know some of these myths that I am hearing so that you can know a little bit more about the dog's food that you are choosing. So first of all, I'm going to bust the first myth, which is actually giving you 11 as opposed to 10, but we're going to go ahead and start with that one. And that is that veterinarians don't know anything about dog nutrition. Actually, we do have some nutrition courses that we take in veterinary school, and I went to the University of Florida, and the first thing that we had to do was take a prerequisite course to get into veterinary school, which was animal nutrition. So it was not just dogs, cats, but it was a lot of different species out there. And in taking that course, I realized that nutrition is very complex. When you look at a kernel of corn, you are not looking at just the kernel of corn, you're looking at the protein content to it, the carbohydrate content to it, the electrolytes, the minerals, and all those other things that are in there. And all of that goes into every single ingredient that goes into that food, and it all has to be calculated to determine what is going to make that food nutritious. So all of that has to be looked at. But we get that beforehand, and then during veterinary school, we do get additional nutritional classes that we take, and then every disease process that we learn about, we also learn about some of the nutrition aspects of that particular disease and what we can do to make that disease better with nutrition. So first myth busted, but that's number 11 on our scale. So what I wanted to do first was just talk a little bit about what happened with dog food and how we got to where we are today with all of the nutritional choices that we have out there, all the dog's foods that we have out there, and how we got to all of these myths that we really need to change. And so when did dog food get so complicated? Well, it got complicated back in March of 2007. And what happened back then was that we ended up with a very raw ingredient in pet food that got recalled. That raw ingredient in the pet food was causing our dogs and cats to become very ill and die secondary to it. It was an ingredient that was being purchased from China, and that particular ingredient is needed in just about basically every dog and cat food out there. It was an ingredient utilized in canned foods or soft foods. And so with that, what China was doing is they were adding basically weight to their ingredient. So they were putting a toxin into that ingredient to make it way heavier, and then therefore they could get paid more for what they were selling us. But that caused people to lose a lot of confidence in the dog food industry and turn to other sources for food. So basically, they started looking at other types of diets that could be created, and that's when we ended up with a market full of additional mom and pop types of foods that had developed. The marketing, then we ended up with a lot of foods that were into the market, and then the marketing strategist had to decide how are we going to make our food the best. And so they started putting a lot of advertising into their pet foods. And with trying to market these, they started putting a lot of things into marketing that were not necessarily real. So they started telling us that corn was a bad ingredient, or that protein needed to be the first ingredient on the diet. And so with that, we created a whole consumer looking for products that were not necessarily the best products on the market. So what I wanted to do today was just to kind of spin that back around and go over these type of things so that you learn a little bit more about what you're looking for in your pet's diet. So we're going to move forward to myth number 10, and that is that pets need variety in their diet. So they don't need to be eating a different meal every single night. Some dogs, may seem like that they're getting a little bit tired of their food. Sometimes that can be for a number of different reasons. That can be because maybe they're getting a lot of treats and they're really interested in those dog treats. Could also be because maybe they're being fed a little bit more than they need to be fed. So if you're getting more food than you need to eat, sometimes you kind of take a break from the amount that you're eating. I know me, when I eat a turkey dinner, like we just had Thanksgiving not too long ago, I consume that. Well, the next morning I'm probably not going to have breakfast because I had a huge meal and then I had dessert and then maybe I went back for seconds on that meal a little bit later. But then in the morning I'm going to skip my food. And so dogs will do that too. So if you find that your dog is skipping meals, you may be better off actually backing down the amount of food that you're feeding at each meal and see if that brings them back to eating and completing their meals. The other thing that you can do to spice up their meals sometimes is add a little bit of warm water to dry kibble if that's what you're feeding, and warm water can actually spice that up a little bit so that they're a little bit more interested in eating that food. When we're moving from one diet to the next diet, we're making frequent changes, and sometimes it can be even adding in just a new treat. That can cause an upset stomach in a dog. Dogs really, their gastrointestinal systems like to have the same food over and over again, and when we change things up, then we can make them feel ill secondary to that. I cannot tell you the number of phone calls and patients that we see the day after Christmas, the day after Thanksgiving, the day after Halloween, and that is because they have all gotten something new in their diet that they're not used to getting, and now they have an upset stomach. So before any of those holidays, we stock up on a ton of bland diet foods because we know that we're going to have a ton of animals who are going to be needing that. So we'll move on to myth number 9, and that is wet food causes dental disease. Dental disease is a very, very complex process, and to say that we're going to rely on the dry food to prevent dental disease in dogs and cats is not something that is really true or that we can do. Even dry food causes dental disease in our dogs. So I have a lot of dogs that eat nothing but a dry diet and they have terrible mouths too. So it's not just feeding a wet food that does it. Now there are some dry dog foods that are designed to help remove tartar. So those foods can be beneficial to dogs or cats that are eating that food, but feeding just a dry diet is not going to prevent dental disease in the dogs. So the other things that play a big role in dental disease in dogs is their genetics. So what breed you have. We see certain breeds that come through our clinic. Yorkies are a big one of them. They can have significant dental disease as well as periodontal disease by 11 months of age. And so they can have already needing to have extractions, and they can already have severe periodontal disease. If anybody knows or has that themselves, they understand a little bit more about what that is, but it's basically pocketing around the tooth where the bone is actually starting to recede away from that tooth. So you start to end up having loose teeth associated with it. The toy poodles are a big one as well. Greyhounds commonly have pretty bad dental disease. Cats, we see some pretty significant dental disease also. And then you get into the head shape. Is it a nice long mouth? Is it a really short mouth? Jaw structure, whether or not maybe they have any retained teeth, which again can go back to genetics as well. There's certain breeds commonly have retained teeth in their mouth. Canines are the biggest ones that we see that are retained, but I've seen retained incisors as well as premolars also. And a retained tooth is a baby tooth that has not fallen out and it's staying right there, right next to the adult tooth, and then that can trap bacteria and can cause disease. Also, what they chew on plays a really big role. So outside of what they're eating for their food, but what are they chewing on besides that food? So I have a lot of my patients, I'll look at their mouth and they'll be 7 or 8 years of age and I'll go, oh my gosh, you've got beautiful teeth. Does your dog chew on sticks? And they go, yes, why they do? And I said, I knew it. And that's because my stick chewers have the best teeth in them, and by far by anybody else. And I'm not saying that stick chewing is the answer or the solution or that all dogs should chew on sticks. Sticks can cause their fair share of problems. Sometimes we have to decide which problem is the best one to deal with, but I've seen sticks get caught up in between mouths. I've seen dogs pick up sticks with a stick sticking protein straight in their mouth and then impale it in themselves. So that's not necessarily the way to go either. But certainly things they chew on are going to play a role with their dental disease. Age. As we all age, things in our body change. Some of the medications that we're on change. They can end up with a little bit more dry mouth. Having a drier mouth can cause dental disease as well. So that's a potential that leads into medical conditions. And then what bacteria is in the mouth. I remember back when I was in a microbiology class, we all had to spit into this little test tube, and what we were testing for is what bacteria do we have in our mouth. And that helped determine who was more likely to have periodontal disease, cavities, and things like that. So sometimes it's just the bacteria that you naturally harbor that is working against you. And then the same thing for the dog. Number 8, price equals quality. So back before '07, I used to tell my clients that the more you pay for your dog food, the better that dog food's going to be. It is going to have the, they're going to be purchasing that particular chicken or that beef from the same manufacturer all the time. So therefore it's going to cost them a little bit more, and the more you pay, the better off that food's going to be. And that's just not true anymore. So again, we go back to '07 when a bunch of mom and pop operations opened up and they started creating these very different diets. And that can be your kangaroo diet, and that could be your venison diet or your rabbit diet. So we have a lot of novel source proteins going into these foods. We've got more expensive carbohydrate sources going into them, so they become a bit more expensive. We start looking at, what makes our pet food be more nutritious, and what can we look at on the label of it if it's not the pricing. So what we're looking for is something called an AAFCO statement on the label, and that's what's going to make it a better nutritional source. AAFCO is the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and they look at the nutritional value of the pet's food, and they tell you whether or not it is something that is going to be beneficial for them, and they can do that by the nutritional source. And that is basically you hire a nutritionist, and they come out and they look at the nutritional content of what you've put together as a food, or they're putting it together for you as a food, and on that label everything calculates out, and you're going to have a nutritionally complete diet. And that is the formulated to meat requirement of AAFCO on that label. Then you have the fed to meat. And basically fed to meat means that this diet has been formulated. On paper, it looks like it's nutritionally complete. Now we're going to feed it to the pets, and we're going to see if it is truly nutritionally complete. And so these pets eat this food, and they do it for over a period of time that is preset by AAFCO. And we do blood tests, body condition scores to make sure that they are going to be able to be healthy on this food. And those that are able to maintain health, they are able to get that nutritional requirement on their food. So these feeding trials have been done. So that's what you want to look for on the label to see whether or not the foods are going to be nutritionally complete. So it's not price so much anymore, to determine whether or not you're going to be feeding a good food. It's going to be, what is the AAFCO statement on my diet? Is it formulated to meat, or is it fed to meat, and does it even have an AAFCO statement? If it doesn't have an AAFCO statement at all, then it has not been looked at by AAFCO to confirm that it's actually nutritionally complete, either by formulated or by fed to meat. So that is one of the really big things to take a look at, is to make sure we've got that AAFCO statement on there. Number 7, homemade diets are the best. I am definitely a fan of a homemade diet. I think homemade diets can be really great for your pets. The problem with homemade diets is that it is very difficult to get that nutritional value that you need out of that food from the foods that we eat. Making a homemade food for your dog is not about just putting a protein source in there, a carbohydrate source in there, a vegetable source in there, and then a fruit source in there, mixing it all up, going and buying a vitamin supplement because it may or may not be nutritionally complete, but I'm going to make sure that it is, throwing that in there, and then saying that I have a nutritionally complete diet. That unfortunately is not enough. It's much more complex than that. And when you do that, you can be overfeeding in one department, you can be underfeeding in another department. So it is really important to reach out to a nutritionist in order to make that nutritionally complete. The other thing is when we are feeding our dogs the food that we eat, it can become very expensive. I don't know if you've looked at the price of chicken lately or the price of beef lately or whatever your protein source is going to be. That is very expensive. It's also very time consuming. And then depending on how you're storing that food, it goes bad very fast. So you have to be worried about whether or not it is going to spoil in the time frame with which you want to use it. So that is myth number 7. We are going to move on to myth number 6. And then myth number 6 is human grade means healthier food. So we have to look at what does a human grade diet really mean. It means that all ingredients in that food is something that a person can eat. And that means everything from the very basic manufacturing, from where it's processed at, and then all the way up to how it's packaged, how it's shipped, and how it is stored. So human grade does not equal quality. Human grade is the way that it's processed, packaged, stored, and shipped. And that's the only thing that human grade means. So if you look at a product label and it says it's made with human grade chicken. Well, okay, so the chicken was human grade. So it was purchased from a place that processes chicken, it stores and it ships it and it does everything right. But as soon as it hits that animal manufacturing plant, it's no longer human grade. You've taken away that human grade quality right there. Human grade does not mean good nutrition. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get into these little freezer foods and I throw them in the microwave, I pull them out and I look at that and I go, is that really chicken? It's human grade, but that doesn't mean it has good nutritional content to it. Doesn't mean that it's going to be really even good for you. It may not have as much nutrition in it as you think it does. So it's the same thing for the dog. Human grade does not correlate with a good nutritional value. It just means that it has been processed, packaged, stored, and shipped so that it's okay for me to eat. So dog food has its own standard by which it has to be taken care of, just like cattle food does, horse food, pig food, all of them do. They have to be stored, shipped, and processed by that particular standard, not human standard. So typically when we're eating or trying to feed a human grade quality, we are paying for that additional human grade quality when dogs and our other animals don't necessarily need that. So when we're looking at it, if that is something that is really important to you, then absolutely that is something that you should be looking for on the label. It's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't mean good nutrition, does not mean it's going to be nutritionally complete for your pet at home. So that's really important. Human grade food means that it's higher ingredient oversight, more stringent sanitation standards, fresher or less processed, higher expense due to higher regulation. Human grade does not mean that it's a balanced diet, doesn't mean that it's got better digestibility, doesn't mean that it's better for every dog, does not mean superior to food grade dog foods, and does not mean that it has any better ingredients in it. So we will move on to myth number 5. Myth number 5, protein should be the first ingredient on the list of your pet's food. This is a big pet peeve of mine. Everybody says that it needs to be one of the first ingredients on there. And that was Blue Buffalo. That came on a big marketing campaign, and I have to give it to the Blue Buffalo advertisers. They have done a really great job of confusing the public as to what they need to look for in their dog food. Protein can be put into a dog's food on different ways. So when a dog food is made and all of the ingredients are weighed out and looked at, they can be looked at what's called a wet matter basis, or they can be looked at a dry matter basis. A wet matter basis means that all of the water that's naturally in that food has remained in that food, and so we're measuring it out there. When you leave water in a food that is 60 to 70% water, which is what meat is, that is going to make it weigh a lot more. But then when you weigh it on a dry matter basis and you've taken all that water out of it, then that ingredient is going to come down a little bit further on that list than where it was before. So some manufacturers weigh all their product on a dry matter basis, and sometimes the manufacturers that are like Science Diet, Royal Canin, ones that are most of us veterinarians consider to be really good foods, will do that. So when you look at their ingredient list, it's going to put them much further back on that list. Also, manufacturers who are using different protein sources. So if they use beef and they use chicken, well, those are going to fall further down because we're using 2 as opposed to using 1. So it's all of whatever that is. So if they use chicken and then they use chicken meal, well, chicken's put up here and then chicken meal is put over here. Again, all of that stuff adds into your protein, but it's not all put up at number 1 because there are 2 sources of that protein in that particular food. So that is with the protein, it is really tricky because you don't know who's measuring their food on a wet matter basis versus a dry matter basis. So when you're looking at that, it's not as important as to where that nutrient falls within the first 5 or 10 ingredients on that list. What is really important is, does it meet AAFCO standards, and is it fed to meat or is it formulated to meat? And if you're looking for the best nutritional source, you want to look for something that is fed to meat, because that indicates that it has been fed to those pets and they have maintained health while eating that food, and that's really important. So number 4, raw diets are healthier. This is another pet peeve of mine. I get a lot of people who come in and they're very proud that they're feeding a raw diet. And while raw diets can be nutritionally complete, they're not always easy to get to be nutritionally complete. But raw diets pose a pretty significant health risk to the human population. So if you're feeding a raw food, you need to keep everything super clean. You need to be really cleaning your kitchen up after you use it. You need to be cleaning your dog bowls. I can tell you that I am very guilty of not cleaning my dog's bowl every time they eat. And there may be other people out there who don't clean it every time, but there might be those people who do. And if you are very fastidious about cleaning that pet's bowl every single time after they eat, then raw diet might be something that you could get into. But the other thing with a raw diet that we don't think about is, okay, we're feeding it to them. It can be contagious potentially in that bowl of food. They eat it, but then what about their mouth afterwards when they're licking us? What about the feces that they excrete? And they have done some studies to look at whether or not they're excreting potentially pathogenic organisms, and guess what? They are. So definitely salmonella was in one study, 14% of feces that were being excreted from dogs eating a raw diet were actually excreting salmonella. So if that feces is out in the yard or if they have an accident inside the house and you're cleaning it up, or that feces gets on their feet and they come inside, there's a potential for that exposure to you as well. So you have to really look at it closely and decide, is a raw diet right for me? If you're out there and you're cleaning up the feces, you're wearing gloved hands, and every time that you're working with their feces, you're going to be gloved up, that may be a diet for you. But you do need to find one that is nutritionally complete. That's really important. Dogs that have been fed raw diets or dehydrated raw foods, chews, anything of that nature, should actually be excluded from healthcare facilities for 90 days. So these are the dogs that go out to maybe the geriatric homes or to children's facilities, something of that nature, or to hospitals to try to, make the life of those people in those places a little bit happier. Those dogs should not be going there within 90 days of eating that food, and that's because the feces can be contaminated. Maybe they could have some contamination in their mouth or their saliva as well. So those guys should not be at those locations. So moving on to myth number 3. Byproducts are bad. So gosh, this is back probably turn of the century, late 90s. I can remember hearing reports of, you know what byproducts are? Byproducts are roadkill. Byproducts are horse. Byproducts are this, that, and the other. And it was all kinds of stuff that you could see listed. It could be raccoon, anything like that that's put in there. And that's absolutely not true. Byproducts are meat, things that you and I I could eat. Other countries, they eat them. We just choose not to eat them. We don't like them. And that would be organ meat. So heart, liver, pancreas, kidney. I had a client of mine, she was so proud because she had gone to this health food facility and she had bought pancreas for her dog to eat. And the label on that and the price on that was incredible. And I was looking at her, I was like, you know, if you fed regular dog food and it had byproducts in it, you could be feeding the exact same thing and paying a lot less. So it's not bad stuff. Byproducts can be bones. They're ground, they're putting bone meal. They could be intestines from animals. Used to be, and I don't know if sausage is still made that way, but sausage was the intestine from the pig or the cow, and they would stuff that, and that's where they would put the meat in. Scrapple, you have to look and see what's in that. I personally love scrapple. Some people don't, but I actually love it, and I just don't look at the label and I go, yep, it tastes good, I'll eat it, so it's good. But bones are really important for dog. That's a lot of times what's left out of the food when we make it ourselves. They need to eat that bone, they need that extra calcium, they need the cartilage. We may not like to eat cartilage, but I'll tell you what, I have seen some people eat some chicken wings and they can clean the cartilage right off of the end of that, and I'm like looking at them, yeah, not for me, but they enjoy it, and our dogs enjoy that too, and they need it. So when we're doing a home cooked diet, we're not getting that kind of stuff. Connective tissue, again, that cartilage, tendons, ligaments. You could find hair, feather, hooves. How many pig's hooves and cow hooves do you see at these fancy dog stores where you can go buy them for them to chew on? But when we put it down as byproducts in their dog food, we think it's an awful thing for them. Well, it's not. It has nutritional quality for them and it's beneficial for them. So byproducts are not bad, so we need to get over that. Next one, on to myth number 2, grain-free is healthier. So back when everybody was, being diagnosed with celiac disease and they needed to be gluten-free, they decided that their dogs needed to be gluten-free too. So Blue Buffalo and some of those really got right behind that, and they started advertising it, grain-free diets. Well, I got news for you. There has been no scientific proof that grain-free diets are healthier for dogs. Some people believe that the grain in the dog food is causing their dog to have allergies. Those dogs who have food allergies, less than 15% of those guys have an allergy to a grain. So I'm not saying that dogs can't have grain allergies and may benefit from a grain-free food. That certainly is possible. But the majority of dogs do not. So looking for a grain-free food is not necessarily the best thing to do for your dog. And actually there have been a lot of dogs that have developed cardiac disease on these grain-free diets. So we go back to our AAFCO statements. We go back to how were these guys tested, or how was this food tested before it was put on the market. And what we find is that these diets were formulated to meet the nutritional needs of the dogs. And what happened was when it got into the live body, the way that nutrition bound up to itself and then the way that it entered into the body's circulatory system, it didn't enter the way that it should have been entering, so some of that nutrients was not available. So what they're thinking is that the legumes that were used for carbohydrates and protein sources in that food ended up binding up some of the vital nutrients for the heart, and then the dog started to develop heart disease. And we're still seeing that today as a cause of heart disease. At one point in time, it was announced that there was this big problem, but none of them foods were pulled off the market. And so those foods are still available on the market today. Hopefully some of those manufacturers have done some changes within there, so they're not having that problem as much. But I usually try to stay away from the foods that were creating that problem, because if they are not creating a nutritionally complete diet in their grain-free diets, what are they doing in their other diets? So I stay away from those guys. So next, number 1, corn is just a filler. That's another one of my big pet peeves, and that's why it hit number 1 on this one. I was just in a room with a client the other day, and we were talking about his pet food and what he was feeding, and he said, yeah, I stay away from this diet. And I said, why? And he said, well, it's full of fillers. I said, okay, well, what's a filler? And he said, well, it's got a bunch of corn in it. And I said, well, Well, let's look at that. Let's break this down. So corn is a readily available in the United States. It's not very expensive. It's an excellent source of carbohydrates. It does have some minerals in it that are very important. It's got vitamins that are very important. So it is a very good source of protein as well as energy. It's got essential fatty acids, essential vitamins. Corn has been the mainstay of populations of people. In third world countries, they take corn and they utilize it, and people thrive on it. So in dog food, it plays a really important role for them as far as their nutritional needs. And the big thing is that it is less expensive. So if we take corn out of the ingredient list and we substitute it with something else, we still have to meet those needs. We still have to get that carbohydrate source in there. We still have to get a little bit of that protein that we found in the corn. We still need to get some essential fatty acids. And the question is, where are we getting those from? And if you look at the ingredients, a lot of times they're substituting it with something like tapioca or something of that nature. So we're still utilizing it. It just may be a more expensive source, in which case the price of that food is going up. So corn is not just a filler. Corn has nutritional value, and it does play a big role in that dog's food. So that was our last one. So the big thing is that we want to be aware of all the trends in dog food and know which ones are just the diets that happen to be the flavor of the month. The barf food, which was a raw ingredient diet that was probably back in the late 80s. It was bone and a bunch of raw stuff in there. The home cooked diets became really popular there for a while, but they were not nutritionally complete. Again, raw food was pretty big. We even had a vegetarian phase. This was in the 90s, and they tried to feed dogs and cats a vegetarian or even a vegan diet, and that was really rough. We had a bunch of cats having a lot of serious problems associated with that. Cats are obligate carnivores, which means they have to have meat in their diet. Dogs were able to get away with some vegetarian diets, but for cats it was just absolutely not possible. Gluten-free, so trying to get all that grain out of their diets just is not beneficial. Not sure what the next diet on the forefront will be, but just remember, when you're looking for your pet's food, look for that AFCO statement. Is it fed to meat? Is it formulated to meat? And does it meet my pet's age requirements? So a diet that is formulated for all pets or all stages of life is not the diet that you want for your senior pet. If you're feeding for all stages of life, you're feeding a puppy food. Puppy food does not meet the nutritional needs of an older dog. It overmeets it. So you want to make sure that you're feeding it for that age as well. So thank you for joining in. I appreciate it.